Good evening. Continuing with the halachas of Yom Neiraim, high holidays, particularly halachas of Rosh Hashanah. And we're continuing where we left off yesterday, that the person that's blowing the shofar can't finish the blowing for whatever reason. So you could have someone else do it, could take over. And he doesn't have to make the bracha again because the bracha that the original one made was for all those that are there to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing shofar. It doesn't matter how many people it is. However, if someone walks in from outside who wasn't there when the bracha was being made, then he has to make the bracha again. And all this, however, and this is what we're up to, applies when the one that just walked in and wants to take over the blowing did not fulfill his requirement yet for shofar. He didn't hear the tkiyas yet. But if he already heard the tkiyas in another shul, and he came over to another place and he realized they need help with the blowing, he does not have to make a bracha again because he himself already heard tkiyas, the blowing of the shofar, the sounds of the shofar, and the people in the shul already heard the bracha because it was made. And therefore, saying another bracha is not necessary. The minhag is that the one that is the chazan for Shachris, the morning service, on Rosh Hashanah, he's the makri. He calls out for the one that's going to blow shofar. So he stands and he says, Tkiya, Shvarim Trua, Tkiya, and so on. He calls out before each blast what sound is going to be, which note you're supposed to blow, in order that he shouldn't get confused or mix up as he's going on with it. And the Alter Rebbe writes, a minhag yafahu, it's a good minhag, it's a nice minhag to do. Now, our custom, however, is, minhag Chabad, is that we don't actually have someone announce it, the way it's done in other communities. Rather, it is, he just points. In the Machzor, Tkiya, Shvarim Trua, and so on, he shows him what he needs to be blown. And the final halacha in this siman is that it's forbidden to take payment to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Even if you were hired before Rosh Hashanah, before Yom Tov, you can't do it because you're taking payment for work that's being done on Yom Tov. And it's forbidden because based on, you have later on, it's actually earlier, where the Shulchan Aruch discusses about why we can't take payment for doing work on Yom Tov. So much so that if a person does take payment for blowing shofar on Yom Tov, he will not see any signs of bracha, any signs of blessing from that money that he earned or that he was paid for blowing the shofar on Yom Tov. There's a few places where Allah tells us any raya siman bracha. For example, working on Purim, working on Tisha B'Av. A person has to, he's allowed to, but he should know that he's not going to see blessing from that work, or in this case, from the payment that he's getting. Okay, let's get a little more detailed into the halachis of the shofar. Dinei shofar Rosh Hashanah. What is the shofar? Where does it come from? What should the shofar be made out of? And so on. We have here 27 seifim. I should mention that some of them are, hopefully we'll cover all of them. Shofar Rosh Hashanah. The shofar which we use on Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah is it should be bent. It turns. And the reason is because we want the Yidden to bend our hearts to Hashem, which is an expression, but the concept is that you're leaning towards, in a heartfelt way, towards the Eibishter in davening. So the shofar should have that bending. All shofars which are bent are kosher, besides the shofar of a para and of a sher, of a bull and of an ox. Why? Because it's not called a shofar. It's called a keren, it's called a horn, but it's not a shofar. And when it comes to the horns of an ox, it says v'cher sheirei v'karnei, which is keren. It's not the shofar that Torah talks about. And the same applies to most animals, that the horn is one solid bone. And if it is, it's not called shofar, rather it's called a keren, and it's not good for using for shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And because it's solid inside, and the shofar is from the same lashon of shvei feres, which is hollow or pipe, And that's how it has to be. But when you come to the regular horns that are solid or they're one bone, that's something, or part of the bone that they're not kosher for Shefer Rosh Hashanah, even b'di'evet. The person didn't do it, it's not okay. Now, within the kosher animals and the ones that the horns are the right ones to use, is a mitzvah min hamuvchar. It's best to blow on the shofar of an ayil of a ram, in order that we should remember Akedas Yitzchak, or rather Hashem should remember Akedas Yitzchak. When Avram Avinu took his son to the Akedah, Hashem was testing him, we say it every day in davening, telling him to bring his son as an offering, and at the very last moment Hashem said don't do it, or a malach said don't do it, an angel, and he turned around and there was a ram that was stuck in the bushes and the thicket, and he used that as a carbon. And that was something which took place by Akedah. We want Hashem to remember on the Day of Judgment, Akedah Yitzchak. So by using this shofar from the ram, we're expressing that. So if we can, we should use that type of shofar. If you don't have a shofar of an ayil, you're yetzer with any other type. Besides of a parah, as we mentioned, that of a bull you can't use. And even if the shofar, which we said should be bent, if let's say it's not bent, but all you have is a straight shofar, it's still kosher. It's better to. But he says that the only time we say it has to be a bent shofar, that's lechatchila. If you have a choice and you can, use a shofar which has that slant in it. But if you can't, then it's fine to use a shofar which is completely, the horn is completely straight. Shofar b'behema tmeya yesh lepeisla afilu b'di'evet. If you have a shofar from a non-kosher animal, then it's possible even after the fact. In other words, you had no choice, you didn't have anything else you could use, because the only things that we could use for serving Hashem, for the work of heaven, which means mitzvahs, are from kosher animals. What happens if somebody steals a shofar? Doesn't have his own shofar, he steals from somebody else. We're not talking about borrowing, we'll talk about that soon, but if someone steals. So if you steal a shofar and you sounded it, even if the ones that you stole it from, the owners, did not give up on finding it, so technically it's not even yours yet. If someone steals and the victim is yours, it doesn't make it okay, but technically it's yours. Right now, they didn't give up yet. So it's really not even yours. You are still yetze, you still fulfill the mitzvah, you and those that are listening to it, from the sound of the shofar. This is not like lulav or matzah or tzitzis, which we say that if you steal them, you did not fulfill the mitzvah. You stole a pair of tzitzis, you put it on, you're not yetzer. It's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's a mitzvah which comes through a sin, and it's not okay. The reason why, not because it comes through an avera, but the object that you're doing it with is stolen. And the reason why by shofar it's different, because the mitzvah of shofar is not the actual shofar, but it's the sound that comes out of the shofar. So although it's a problem and it's unfortunate that the shofar itself was stolen, the sound that's coming out of it is not stolen, and that you could use that, and you could be yetzer for the mitzvah of shofar. In listening to the sound of something, you don't have the rules of gezel. It's not considered robbing or stealing because you heard a sound that wasn't yours. Especially, you don't touch the shofar. And therefore, even though it was stolen, you're still yetze with the mitzvah of shofar. However, because you got the shofar through stealing, you should not make a bracha on it. You're yetze technically, and people listen to yetze technically, but don't make a bracha because it's stolen. And it's a mitzvah abba ba'avera, and therefore we don't do a bracha. Same applies, by the way, to non-kosher food. If someone's eating non-kosher food, which he shouldn't, let's say they're starting to get closer to Yiddishkeit and they didn't get rid yet of all the non-kosher food, you don't make a bracha on it. What about borrowing a shofar from someone else without their knowledge? So you didn't walk up to a guy in Rosh Hashanah morning and just grab the shofar out of him and he's screaming, I need it. But he finished davening and he has a shofar in a shul. So maybe during Corona it's different because no one wants you to put your mouth in their shofar. But in a regular situation, if you took someone else's shofar, you borrowed it, you're going to use it and you're going to put it back. They're just not there to ask them. You're allowed to take that even lechatchila without asking, and do the blow the shofar. And the reason is because normally a person would be happy that someone else does a mitzvah with their. We have a question from someone watching online. How can stealing be a mitzvah? Stealing is not a mitzvah; it's a sin. It's an avera. However, thanks for the question. However, the sound is what the mitzvah is. And because you're listening to a shofar, which you can't make a bracha on it because it's stolen, but the sound that comes out of it, you can still fulfill the mitzvah with that. Unlike other objects that if you stole them, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Like if you stole your tzitzis, then you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, and you shouldn't do it because it's a stolen item. It's the object that you're doing the mitzvah with. It's not the sound of the object. You're not allowed to steal, even for a mitzvah. But if it was done, you still technically fulfill the mitzvah of shofar. Okay, so if you take somebody else's shofar, not stealing, borrowing, they left it in shul, you're thinking, should I take that and sound it or not? You're allowed to, because we assume, and this is the norm, that a person is happy that you should do a mitzvah with their object. The same applies to their talis, tefillin. The assumption is that most people want, so they're happy that another mitzvah should be done with my mitzvah object. Taking it off the premises is a different story. Maybe it'll break, maybe you get lost. But in that place, then you can do it. What about a shofar of Avodah Zarah? Let's assume that the idol worshippers and the like, they have a shofar. Can you take that shofar and use it? So if it's Avodah Zarah of a Yid, it belongs to a Jewish person. For example, he had a shofar and he started to bow down to it as an idol. Hopefully it doesn't exist these days. But what we learn from here is an interesting halacha. You're not Yotze. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah of shofar, even if you have permission to use it, because a shofar has a measurement. It has a minimum size it has to be. And that's a tefach, which is about 3.5 inches. And if you use that, if it's a Yid's Avodah Zarah, in other words, a Yid bowed down, used it as an idol, it has to be burnt. And because halachically it has to be burnt, it's not considered to have any size. It wasn't burnt yet. But as far as halacha is concerned, this doesn't exist. It has no size. And therefore, it's not fit for the shofar. And the fact that there are ways to change the status would only apply if it's a non-Jew's idol. And the non-Jew could decide, I'm making this not an idol anymore. Destroy it or whatever it is. But if it's a Yid's Avodah Zarah, then he doesn't have the ability to just break it or change its status. It has to be burnt. And therefore, because it's going to be burnt, anything which has to be burnt is as if it's burnt already. And in halacha, we say you can't use it for anything. For shofar, it doesn't have a measurement in it. Okay, we're going to stop here for Ma'ariv. Be continued with Hashem tomorrow. Thanks for your questions, comments. If you're watching on the replay, you're welcome to ask your questions and we'll try to address it.
806.